After the World War II, the world's political and military power was mainly divided in two. The Warsaw Pact embodied what was referred to as the Eastern Bloc, while NATO and its member countries represented the Western Bloc. NATO and the Warsaw Pact were ideologically opposed and, over time, built up their own defenses, starting an arms race that lasted throughout the Cold War. Everything about this great geopolitical conflict of that time was concentrated in one place, Germany, which was divided and influenced by those two alliances, and the symbol of it was the Berlin Wall. The Soviets had an overwhelming military presence in East Germany, and the only factor that kept them from walking into West Berlin was a particular threat posed by nuclear missiles. There were thousands of intermediate-range missiles within range of Soviet Union all over Europe, and in 1961, the US placed new generation of medium-range ballistic missiles in Turkey and Italy, putting a lot of pressure on the Soviets. Now, the Soviets were looking for a countermeasure, but they were not able to do the same because they had no land allies close to the United States, but what they had was Cuba. For a long time, US treated Cuba as their backyard since it is only 90 miles from Florida. In 1959, things changed, and a charismatic character named Fidel Castro seizes political and military power in Cuba. He nationalized most profitable sectors and kicks out all American businesses and transforms Cuba into first communist state in the Western Hemisphere. So the CIA had this elaborate plan to overthrow and kill Castro using Cuban immigrants from Florida. And as the landing point, they chose the Bay of Pigs. But the operation, it was very ill-conceived and even more ill-executed, which resulted in a total disaster. Nikita Khrushchev, the first secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, took that opportunity and formed an alliance with Castro. He placed intermediate-range nuclear missile in Cuba to deter United States from invading Cuba and to project power in that region. The first construction site for the missile installation was spotted on October 1962 near San Cristobal. Missiles were transported on large civilian ships and were unloaded at night so nobody could see them. The United States had spies that provided specific information about the location west of Havana, where very strange things were happening, so they sent U-2 planes to spy and take pictures of that area. And on October 15th, they've got the infamous picture of the installation. The Soviets had missiles that could reach United States, submarines with nuclear torpedoes, and additional missiles on ships that were heading to Cuba. Kennedy decides to impose a naval blockade around Cuba, termed a quarantine, to prevent further Soviet shipments of military equipment. It was the only sane and human response in a nuclear standoff. Castro sends a letter to Khrushchev. He writes, "I consider that the aggression is almost imminent within the next 24 to 72 hours. The way you see it, there are only two outcomes. The first is that the US will invade and occupy Cuba, and the second is that they will seek to destroy your nuclear missiles. You must strike preemptively with your nuclear forces against the US targets. You should not wait and act first." This letter starts to worry Khrushchev, and to make things even worse, on October 27th, a US U-2 spy plane was shut down using a Soviet anti-aircraft battery, an action that was not authorized by the Kremlin. The US military was minutes away from retaliating. The state of readiness for total war was at DEFCON 2, where all safety features on nuclear devices were off, and nuclear bomber were in the air, submarines were heading towards USSR. It was one step away from the end of the world. But Kennedy held back since he was still trying to find a diplomatic solution to the crisis. With Khrushchev acknowledging that they need an off-ramp, he needed to get out of this situation and save face. So he sends a letter asking Kennedy to promise not to invade Cuba, and more than that, he wants the nuclear missiles removed from Italy and Turkey. Kennedy sends his brother Robert to secretly meet with Anatoly Dobrinin, the Soviet ambassador to the US. Robert says that US will swap the missiles from Turkey if the Soviets withdraw theirs from Cuba, but it cannot publicly acknowledge of the agreement. The next day, Khrushchev on Radio Moscow states that they will withdraw their missiles from Cuba and remove all military personnel, so the crisis and tension come to a resolution. Neither US nor the Soviets had any intentions for the start of a nuclear war. They were playing tit for tat. Both of them were bluffing, but nobody were in control of the outcome. The resolution of the Cuban Missile Crisis was a turning point in Cold War geopolitics. It highlighted the dangers of nuclear brinkmanship and led to the establishment of direct communication channels between Washington and Moscow, known as the hotline, to prevent future crises. The crisis had far-reaching implications. It underscored the importance of diplomacy and the need for nuclear disarmament, influencing subsequent arms control agreements such as the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty of 1963. With international tensions rising again, people seem to forget how close we were from self-annihilation. Let's not make the same mistakes again.